Imagine it's your wedding day. The plum blossoms are out. Your family has been preparing for a year. And a drunk monk you've never seen before lifts you over his shoulder and runs. Your husband is screaming. Your brothers are chasing him. The whole village is chasing him. And the one thing no one is watching is the mountain right behind you. Let me tell you this story. It was the late Southern Song Dynasty, around the year 1198. The story takes place in a small mountain village in southern China in today's Zhejiang province, in the hills outside the city of Hangzhou. Now, Hangzhou was one of the great cities of the ancient world. Marco Polo would come there a few decades later and call it the most beautiful and splendid city on earth. But our story doesn't happen in Hangzhou. It happens 2 days' walk north, in a village of 40 families at the foot of a steep green mountain. The village name doesn't matter, it's not on any map. What matters is that 2 families in it, the Lin family and the Shen family, had been planning a wedding for a year. The bride was Lin Wan. 17 years old, she had been sewing her own shoes for 3 months. Red silk, gold thread, and she hadn't slept the night before. Her mother said she looked like a ghost that morning, pale and quiet and unable to eat. The bride's father was a river merchant. The groom's father was a tea merchant. It was a good match. 2 ledgers joined, 2 ancestral lines joined. A piece of land would exchange hands. Everyone in the village had been counting the days. Now, you have to understand what a rural wedding in Song-era China was. It wasn't the joining of 2 young people. It was the joining of 2 houses, 2 trades, 2 lines of memory that went back generations. The whole village was expected to attend. If you were counted a friend of either family, you came. If you were counted a rival of either family, you came anyway. To miss a wedding in your own village was a public insult that could last a decade. So that morning, at the first hour of the day, everyone came. The wedding was set up in the outer courtyard at the base of the mountain, a broad, flat terrace the village used for gatherings. Red silk had been stretched over a wooden frame to make a pavilion. Long tables were set up in rows. The cooks had been working for 3 days. There were plum trees around the outer walk. There were musicians. There were children running between the tables, and old men leaning on their canes by the food, and aunties whispering about Lin Wan's dress. The officiant arrived, a Taoist priest from a temple down the valley. Lin Wan sat inside the red bridal sedan, veiled, her hands folded on her knees. The groom, Shen Zhong, stood at the head of the courtyard in his new silk robe, his face very serious with the weight of the day. Now, the priest began the opening invocations. The village fell quiet, and that's when the stranger arrived. He came down the mountain path. You could smell him before you could see him. Wine and sweat and incense. He was a Buddhist monk. His robe gave it away, but the robe was filthy, torn at one sleeve, missing a sash. He had a wine gourd tied to his hip. A cracked paper fan stuck out of his belt. He was barefoot. His hair was uncombed. He was, very clearly, drunk. A couple of the village men moved toward him to escort him out, but he wasn't aggressive. He was just lost. Someone's grandmother held out a dumpling to him. He grinned at her. He took the dumpling. Then he looked up. He looked up at the mountain, just once. He looked at it in the way that a sailor looks at a storm, the way a man looks at something he has already understood. His face changed. Most of the village missed it. Lin Wan, inside the sedan, couldn't see him at all. And then he moved. He crossed the courtyard in 3 strides. He pushed past the Taoist priest. He pulled the veil off Lin Wan's face. She looked up at him, a stranger, a drunk, a madman. And before she could scream, he lifted her out of the sedan, threw her over his shoulder like a sack of rice, and ran. Now, there was a pause, half a second maybe. Nobody moved. The musicians kept playing for another beat, not understanding exactly what was happening. Then the village exploded. Shenzhong went first, shouting her name, then her father, then her brothers, then her uncles, then the priest, his robes flapping, then the tea merchant, and the village headman, and the blacksmith, and the aunties with their sandals off, and the children shrieking with excitement. 50 people, 100 people, the entire wedding pouring out of the courtyard and running down the path after a drunk monk carrying the bride on his shoulder. He was fast, faster than a drunk man should have been able to run. He was laughing the whole time, howling with it. Linwan was crying and beating at his back. Her wedding hairpins had come loose. Her red silk sleeves were tearing where he had held her. Bouncing on his shoulders, she could see the tops of the plum trees. She could see her groom's face contorted with rage. She could see her father's legs pumping, his fists in the air. She could see the wedding pavilion getting smaller behind them, the long tables still set, the red silk canopy still standing, everything still perfect. All of it was getting smaller and smaller as the monk carried her away. The monk ran 100 paces, 200, 500, down the path, away from the mountain, down into the lower fields. The entire village was behind him, spread out in a long human line on the path, running for all they were worth. Even the musicians had dropped their drums and joined the chase. The courtyard was empty. Now, if you're enjoying this one and you're not subscribed yet, what are we doing here? Hit subscribe with all notifications on and click the like button. The monk ran another 200 paces. He stopped at the edge of a low creek. He turned around. Still holding the bride, the whole village was 50 paces behind him and closing fast. And then the ground shook. It was first like a crack, like thunder, but from under their feet. The old men felt it in their ankles. The children stopped running. Linwan stopped beating the monk's back. Then a second crack, then a roar. A piece of the mountain came loose. Not a rock, not a boulder, a slab the size of a small temple, gray stone and red earth, peeling away from the cliff face above the courtyard. It hung there for a breath, and then it fell. It fell on the wedding courtyard, on the pavilion, on the red silk canopy, on the long tables, on the musicians' abandoned drums, on every single chair where every single person had been sitting. It landed, and the sound of it landing was the loudest thing any of them had ever heard. Then silence. The kind of silence that doesn't fill in, the kind that just sits. The monk set Linwan down, gently. He did it in the way like you'd set a sleeping child into bed. She stood on the path in her torn red silk, her hair wild around her face, and she did not move. The village stood in a long, scattered line behind her, all of them staring at the courtyard, at the rock, at the drunk monk, at the bride. Shenzhong realized it first, then her father, then her brothers, then slowly everyone. Now, I need to tell you who this monk was. His name was Li Xiuyuan. He had been born 70 years earlier in Tiantai down the coast. As a young man, he entered Lingyan Temple, one of the oldest and most famous temples in China just outside of Hangzhou. There, he was ordained as Daoji, the one who saves the way. But nobody in the folk traditions ever called him that. They called him Ji Dian, Crazy Ji, or more often, Ji Gong, Lord Ji, the mad monk. He drank, he ate meat, he slept wherever he fell, he sang in the temple halls, he swore at magistrates, he quoted a line that became one of the most famous in all of Chinese Buddhism. 酒肉穿肠过, 佛祖心中留. Wine and meat pass through the stomach. The Buddha stays in the heart. The senior monks at Lingyan hated him. They asked the abbot, Huiyuan, to expel him. The abbot refused. The abbot is recorded as saying one of the great lines in Chinese Buddhism. 佛门广大, 岂不容以颠生? The gate of Buddha is vast. Can it not make room for one crazy monk? Now, in Chinese Buddhism, there's a category of being called luohan, or arhat. There are 18 of them in the tradition. An arhat is a fully enlightened being, someone who has gone past the training the rest of the monks are still inside. The rules are the scaffolding. An arhat has already built the house. They don't need the scaffolding anymore. The tradition says Jigong is Xianglong Luohan, the taming dragon arhat, the arhat who sees. And what he saw that morning walking down the mountain was a cliff that was about to fall. He saw it hours before anyone else. He could smell it in the rock. He could hear it in the stream. He could feel it in his feet. And he knew something else. He knew that if he walked into the village and said, "The mountain is about to fall, empty the courtyard," nobody would believe him. A drunk, a stranger, a madman, they would have laughed. They would have kept setting the tables. So he did the one thing that would empty the courtyard in 30 seconds. He stole the bride. Back on the path, Lin Wan understood before anyone else. She knelt first, then Shen Zhong knelt, then her father, then every person in the village, one by one on the dirt path, bowing toward the barefoot, drunk monk with the wine gourd on his hip. Jigong took a sip from that wine gourd. He laughed. He handed Lin Wan her veil. He patted Shen Zhong on the shoulder like a man congratulating him on his wedding. And then he walked past them. Up the mountain path, still singing, still drinking, still barefoot, until he was smaller than the plum trees, and then smaller than a bird, and then he was gone. They held the wedding 2 weeks later in a different field. Lin Wan and Shen Zhong had 4 children. The oldest was a daughter. They named her Ji, after the monk. Lin Wan told her daughter the story. Her daughter told her children. Her children told theirs. By the time it reached written tradition, 800 years had passed, and the story has not changed. The kidnapper was the savior. The sinner was the saint. The mountain was going to fall. And 800 years later, every statue of Jigong still shows him drunk, disheveled, laughing, the wine gourd on his hip, the torn fan in his belt, because the tradition remembers what that village learned that morning. A man can look completely wrong, but be completely right. If you know someone like that, someone who gets written off, someone people call strange, or a mess, or too much, share this video with them. They will love this story. Now, the story on your screen right now is one of my favorites. It's about a boy everyone called a fool. He was born with 6 fingers and too much faith, and he fell in love with a girl far above him. A girl who, half joking, dared him to cut one of those fingers off. What started as a joke became something so reckless, so impossibly devoted that it outlasted death itself. Click on it right now, and I'll see you in the next story.